Well, Damian Coory, welcome to the Knack on Australia podcast.
Hey, man, how are you? Good to see you, Dan. Good to be here.
Very, very pleased to have you on. I suspect most of my audience will know you as the host of The Other Side, an independent centre-right media show in Australia. What I don't think most will be aware of is your full career journey and your professional bona fides. Do you mind briefly describing this so people can get a sense of the depth of your experience in media and communications?
Yeah, okay. I spent 13 years in broadcast journalism in Australia in the late 80s and 90s. I'm dating myself. I'm pretty old. But I was the news director at Triple M FM Brisbane. I was a senior reporter for Channel 10. I was a presenter for ABC Radio of the main news bulletins across the state of Queensland, and also worked at 3AW as a drive time news presenter and senior journalist back in the day in Melbourne. Had a bit of a time, and Sydney was Network 10. Then I decided around about 1999 that there probably wasn't going to be a long-term career future working in the media. So I moved into public relations and started working for a firm called Hill and Knowlton, which was a big global PR firm in Melbourne. And I worked for them in their Asia Pacific crisis and issues management team. So I became an expert in crisis communications, issues management communications, corporate comms, the sort of communications that's not really about marketing so much as reputation building and reputation protection. And we then decided that it would be better if I was based in Hong Kong because I was doing so much work out of Asia. I went to Hong Kong for a couple of years, as they say, and stayed there for 16. And then I worked for, Hill and Knowlton still, and then I moved to Edelman Public Relations, which is another big global PR firm, and I ran their Hong Kong and Taiwan offices, so fairly large offices of that firm. So, and I got an MBA in there from the Australian Graduate School of Management along the way, and kind of just, got into leadership and managing, a large professional services firm and learned the ropes in terms of corporate management in that space. And then we moved out of Hong Kong, moved to the Philippines for a few years, then moved back to Australia after COVID, and came back to a country that just looked nothing like the one I'd left, and decided that in my older years I might get back to my roots. So in 2020 I started The Other Side as an audio podcast, and it's just sort of grown slowly, I've got to say, and gradually. And it's not, setting any world records, but it is doing okay, and we still do it every week. Can't say it's an economically viable business model, but it's an interesting sideline for somebody who likes to write and present, and it's a bit of fun that I can do on the side, apart from my consulting work that I do as my real job the rest of the time. So,
It's a valuable little asset in Australia that needs to happen here more, I think.
I'm kind of too close to it to get a perspective of what it's like from how it looks to other people from the outside. I don't quite know how it's perceived, whether it's perceived as being particularly influential or not, actually. But there's definitely a gap. I mean, there is a big gap and a big need for people to be. I want it to platform other people, where I don't really want it necessarily just be me all the time. But I'm trying to do that in a way that is entertaining and fast. So it's kind of. I didn't want to go the full podcast interview format because I find it not as appealing to people as you are, mate, to get guests on. I don't think, but I don't seem to have the pull when it comes to getting guests on. I don't know. But what I'm trying to do with it is kind of, look at the issues and summarize things and bring my journalism and writing skills to that. So people say to me, "Gee, you speak well." No, I don't actually. Everything's written. I'm hopeless without pre-writing a lot of it.
It's very, very professionally produced. That's one of the many things that I appreciate about it. If you don't mind, do you mind just providing a harbour-side view of the media landscape for political commentary in Australia today?
Oh boy. Well, I'm not actually an expert in that area, to be honest, but and I mean, I would say that there is. And when I say I'm not an expert in the Australian market. I haven't worked in the Australian market as a government relations or media relations person specifically since I came back. So that's not my area of focus these days. But just as an observer, I would say that we've obviously got an emerging uh, discussion online going on, the digital media space that's really emerging. We've seen an incredible diminishment of journalistic quality and standards in mainstream media, which I don't think can be fully blamed upon a lack of resources, a lack of financing, or the shift to online audiences and audiences dropping off. I actually blame the industry itself. I think that the lack of creativity and diversity of thought in formatting, somewhere about the 1990s, the news business in Australia, particularly in television, went a little bit crazy, and I think it was best illustrated in the Frontline comedy show of that era as well. Just the sort of thinking that was dominating these current affairs newsrooms and things in our television stations, that everything had to be titillating, that everything had to be fairly entertaining, superficial, emotive. That the audiences had no capacity or desire to debate, discuss, or think about difficult issues. And I think that is definitely, I mean, we all understand the realities of the fact that people don't want to tune into long form content necessarily all the time and have their thinking caps on when they're watching telly after a hard day's work. But I think it's an insult to the Australian people, and was an insult to the Australian people, that the industry just took that on board so fully, and just went completely to a current affair, becoming a complete, magazine show, really dealing with, con men and what do they say, all those sorts of stories that are just, not really looking at serious issues in a serious way with serious spokespeople, but all very, moving away from the cognitive, the brain stuff into the feels all the time. So I think that descent of quality into sort of sensationalistic garbage that we saw in current affairs, in television current affairs, we saw a bit of a follow-on effect in some of the sort of approaches to the morning shows and things like that. But then we saw the disappearance of state-based current affairs shows like State Affair, which I think operated in every state in Australia as a state-based show on the 7 network. Today Tonight, which was a 9 equivalent of that, which was, I think, in every state as well, with a state-based version. And so there's just no local state-based news. So what we're seeing today is state politics covered the way local government used to be covered, pretty lightly because the resources aren't there, which is bad because we are predominantly a federation of states. So a lot of our really important laws are made at a state level, and we need that scrutiny at a state level, and we're just not getting it perhaps outside of New South Wales and Victoria a little bit, but we're not really getting it in Queensland, South Australia, Tasmania. WA is a bit different because they tend to be very independent in their media in some ways anyway. They're very sort of much, we are the West, we're a bit different. They've always had quite independent media. But I think even in New South Wales and Victoria, we're not getting the depth of coverage of the state issues that we once got, and we should probably have. So I think that's pretty bad.
Yeah, the big gorilla in the room in the Australian media scene is obviously the ABC, our nationally taxpayer-funded broadcaster. So let's engage in just a little bit of light morning ABC bashing, if you please. John Howard famously said that the ABC needs to find its quote unquote right-wing Philip Adams. Apart from Tom Switzer from the CIS, who hosted Between the Lines, I can't think of any prominent centre-right voice who has been given a long-standing platform on a national broadcaster. How can centre-right views get a better hearing on the ABC?
They can't. The problem with the ABC, well, I mean, there's no point in sugarcoating it. I mean, the reality is that you've got an organisational culture that if you've studied any organisational change or cultural change, you'd understand that if you put somebody in that environment, they're going to get swallowed up and shoot up and spat out. Or they'll be made a mockery of, they'll be made if they could even stand to hold the job in that environment, in that climate that they'd be operating in, that's so identity politics dominated and so left-wing thinking dominated, that even if you could survive in that organizational culture, you would be just the token conservative. You'd be you'd be like who was that guy that used to have on Fox News in America that was like the Democrats that they'd wheel out? And now they're a little bit better at it, but they used to just have one guy, and he was like the the token Democrat. But you would end up in that sort of a frame. We've
Had
got to
it
go
in
back to what is a
had it in
national
tones, right? Yeah.
yeah, what is a national broadcaster for,
Mm,
right? Uh, we also have to reassess that. So there's a few things that need to happen. We first of all got to say, um, do we need a national broadcaster in the form that we used to have one now that we've got the internet? What is the role of a national broadcaster? What should it be? What shouldn't it be? And then I think we've got to look at, okay, so there's some gaps in the market. The market isn't fulfilling certain things. The free market doesn't work in terms of maintaining a certain cerebral quality of news and debate
mm,
because the dumbing down appeals to more people, so you get higher ratings if you go the
mm,
current affair route. So, although I do argue they shouldn't have gone that far, but I do believe that yes, you're not going to get as intelligent discourse and dialogue about important issues as you might get if you're driven purely by a commercial bottom line incentive. So we do need perhaps that gap filled, right? It would be good to have a good issues based, good quality debate, balanced current affairs type Q&A show that was actually balanced, that was actually
mm,
correctly produced. We also probably, the other non-commercial part of news gathering for an Australian news organisation would be foreign correspondence. It's too expensive for Channel 7, Channel 9, Channel 10 to pay to have foreign correspondence in every market. They have one person usually covering North America and one person usually covering Europe, and that's it. So someone based in LA, someone based in London. And that's all they can afford. So we need a network of foreign correspondents. Now, my model, I would suggest that we set that up um, as part of this national broadcast model, and we allow every media outlet to use that content freely because it's taxpayer funded. So it should be
mm,
accessible to 9, 7, 10, all the radio stations. A bit the BBC sort of do this with the world. They do permit people to use their content to a certain extent, and I think that's kind of the model of the ABC. It should be okay. This is taxpayer funded, but it's non-competitive, um, and we're going to allow and permit all networks to use any content produced by this national broadcaster because it is taxpayer funded, and it ought not have that, because what people don't realize, Dan, is the ABC is a barrier to entry for media organizations and for the arts, actually. It's why we
mm,
don't see as much diversity in the arts as we should,
mm,
because the ABC is there as this kind of gatekeeper, and it's so well funded that you can't compete with the ABC if you've got to put ads in your show.
mm,
So if I want to set up, I always use the case of Daily Mirror Group, DMG Media, in the 1990s, I think it was, the precursor. They won the FM licenses, which are now Nova FM. But originally, they started a network called Vega, VEGA. And the idea of Vega, and they just did it in Sydney and Melbourne initially, the idea of Vega was to be a center left talk radio network for a younger demographic to counter 2UE, 2GB, 3AW, 4BC, 6BR, which was perceived at that time to be quite right wing. So they wanted to create a kind of competitor to ABC talk radio in the commercial realm on FM. And that
mm,
would have been a very good advancement for the commercial media world in Australia. It
mm,
would have been great to get a talk radio going on FM because
mm,
we don't have any talk on FM now. And talk radio is dying in Australia. Nobody under 55, literally nobody, if you look at the radio ratings, practically listens to talk radio under 55 years of age. And that's bad for our society and for our discourse. Now,
mm,
Vega could have worked, but it couldn't compete. It
mm,
folded. They took a lot of big stars from the ABC, paid them a lot, got them on air. No one's going to listen to the show if it's got to run ads, if you're up against a competitor that doesn't have to run ads, right?
mm,
And nobody's going to support a commercial enterprise when the government is funding and competing unfairly with this big, anti-competitive monopoly monster,
mm,
in a sense. So the ABC, this is what people don't consider. Its very existence inhibits the appropriate market development of quality media, other quality media sources,
mm,
because it creates a barrier to entry to anybody who does say, actually, you know what? We're not going to produce a current affair as a trash show anymore. We're going to do real news. Oh, but hang
mm.
on, we'll have to compete with the ABC, and they're
Yeah.
free. and they don't have to run ads, and they're going to beat us, or they're going to take half the market share at least, or even a third of it. It's going to make us non-viable, right, as a business.
Yeah, I mean,
So it's a barrier. It's a
The
barrier.
Guardian in Australia competes directly with the ABC and for commentary, doesn't it? I mean, it's the same type of political outlook. Some of the people who work there are ex-ABC. Then
It's a
so
print media outlet, though. It's not competing as a radio. I'd like to see the Guardian try and start a radio or television network. Good luck. They
interesting.
can't even they can barely fund their print. They have to beg for people to give them money to fund their print journalism, which I'll say is incredibly biased rubbish anyway. Campaign oriented left wing nonsense in the Guardian. I
Yeah.
wouldn't even bother. If it actually was a newspaper, as they say, I wouldn't wrap my fish and chips in it. But anyway,
On the right, Damien. So Sky News, I hate the expression, but after dark, has been blasted by some, I say, on the kind of moderate lefty side of the Liberal Party, as being in part responsible for the recent federal election loss. What's your view of Sky News political commentary, and what can they do better?
I don't know how you could blame Sky News for the loss. I'm not sure what the thesis is there. Is there an idea behind that, or?
I guess they're saying that in the public commentary, which has obviously been leaked to favourable media outlets, they say that it caused their audience, which Liberal Party members, to focus on issues that supposedly, they argue, the broader mainstream wasn't as focused on. I mean, I don't accept that critique, but that's what they're saying.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to work out, you have your own media outlet, you're doing something different to them. And I think there is legitimate basis for saying that they can do better, but not not in response to that sort of progressive critique. But what do you think? I mean, you do your own show. How can they be improved?
I would firstly say that I'm like you. I can't buy that argument. It seems to me like again, there seems to be a lot of people on the progressive side of the Liberal Party at the moment who are doing these reviews, or there's a lot of things being floated and said that are just quite bizarre. And I think we've got to look at it from a marketing perspective. This whole thing. Now, Sky News is in the business of ratings. They're in the business of making sure they get a decent audience size. Sky News, as far as I'm concerned, is the only voice of the centre-right really in the media in Australia that is consistently putting conservative and centre-right views. I don't think in any way, shape or form are they extreme in that. In fact, I wouldn't put them to the right of Fox, let alone to the level of Newsmax or GBN or any of the UK or US equivalent sort of right-wing channels. I would say Sky is centre-right, literally. I'd say that the Australian market is just so left-wing that it tends to scare these progressive liberals too much. And I think that's fundamentally the problem, if we want to get into it, of what's going on, right? What went wrong in the election. It had nothing to do with how Sky News was covering things. It had
I was going to ask that question. I mean, but before I do though, like, are there ways that you think it could be improved, Sky News, to be more effective and than what it currently is?
Well, it comes down to budget. I mean, it's the only critique I have of Sky News is that it's a little boring in its recycling of the same commentators and its use of and reliance upon opinion people. That it might be more interesting if they had more experts on and maybe covered things a bit more deeply rather than just sort of the production of falling back on. But it's hard to get, resourcing. It's difficult, right? As just doing a podcast, I can tell you it's extremely difficult. Which is sort of a part-time hobby of mine. I mean, it's not easy to get people lined up and to get guests on and do all of that. And they've got to keep this content going all day long. And they're not flush with funds. As far as I know, I think their budget, a lot of it comes from a lot of their online, the YouTube stuff. which is very popular with the US audience. So they're getting a nice bit of cash from there. I don't really know the economics, so I shouldn't be speaking out of line. But I mean, it could be that they're not attracting as many advertisers. And I know that advertisers, one of the big problems we've got in Australia is that the corporate world will not back conservative content, that the left have captured the corporate space with,
Mm.
all of this ESG, DEI, through HR, through PR. The left have worked their magic again, but now in the sort of traditionally right-wing areas of the corporate world and things like that. So we're not seeing the commercial support that we should but people will wake up eventually, I hope, in this country and in Sydney and just start to, although who knows, I've been saying this for a long time, but there's a massive opportunity out there for anyone who wants to apply some sort of anti-woke marketing to a product to just see so
Well, we're
much market share.
seeing a lot of that pushback in the US, but it hasn't quite hit.
Huge. Huge. I
Famously,
mean, what was
the
American
Cognac
Eagle
and
doing?
yeah. And we haven't picked up
Gone crazy. They're
I was
selling like
liking the
hotcakes.
exactly, yeah, no, and,
Share prices up.
all like tour. Hey,
Hmm.
so moving to the last federal election, what did you make of the media strategy of the Liberal Party during that election? And what could they have done better?
It was let down by the lack of a proper political strategy. And then,
Mm.
so you have your political strategy, then you have your messaging strategy, then you have your media strategy, right? So you work out your values, what you're standing for, what your positioning is in the marketplace, what's your strategy, corporate strategy. It would be if it was a company. Okay, you take that corporate strategy or your political strategy. You then develop your messaging from that. What is the story we're going to tell? What's the narrative we're going to deliver? How we're going to present this simply and clearly to people over a campaign period, bearing in mind that people can only take in a certain number of points, and they'll vote on certain emotional drivers and value drivers over rational detail too much. They just want to get the feel of the thing, and they vote on a values basis, which is healthy. There's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. People don't have time to look at every single policy. And then you execute that through the appropriate channels. They failed at every level, abominably. And it stems from the top level. You must first have a united approach. And I've argued since the election on the other side, Dan, and I think you were on the show and we talked about this, that you really got to look at that strategy at the top and say, who is our target audience and who are we, and do our brands match these audiences? And there are, in the Australian landscape, two audiences that the Liberal Party have to capture. One is the conservative audience and the other is the progressive audience within the classical liberal sense. And they have a problem in that you can't these days, because of values clashing on those two, although people within the party will still argue that you can find a middle ground. You might be able to, but you'll need to do it really carefully. They didn't do that. They didn't achieve that. They didn't appeal to both those audiences. Now, I don't know how you do it. I don't know if you split the party and you do it under two separate brands. You say the National Party, you guys are going to go right wing, the Liberal Party, you guys are going to go progressive, and we're going to go two different directions, clearly offering the market two clear, distinct products that have alignment in their values, in their messaging, and in the result we want, and that will work. If you try to be all things to all people, you will fail. You cannot sell a product that is conflicted in the story it's telling, or its reason for being, or the product you're offering, or anything on any dimension. So you have to make a decision. And I think the problem that the Liberal Party is facing now, and we've seen in the latest polls since the election, the decline is continuing because the Liberal Party's decided, okay, we're going to be the left-wing party of that two options. But what's going to happen to this right side? Well, what's happening is we're seeing the Liberal Party drop to below 30%. Sorry, Liberal National Party. Two parties. So Liberal National Party primary vote share is now down to 29%. Of that, let's say 7 is national. So 22 is where the Liberal Party's at. The Liberal Party is very near being a moderate to minor party. If you hit under that 20% level, right? They're on their way to being the smallest they've ever been. They're in crisis. They have an existential crisis. They are in crisis denial, which is something I'd like to talk about later, what crisis denial is and how it infects organizations. But they are in that state right now. Okay, so they're in a position of crisis denial. They are diminishing. They are going out of business, and they have to ask themselves, what do we need to do? And what they need to do is something quite radical. And they don't want to do it because the organizational structure doesn't lend itself to it. And they're too focused on that, and they're not focused enough outwardly on what the audience demands. That strategy will hold them 20%. It will work. The Susan Ley, let's be left wing, let's be the center left, centrist, and lean with the Australian because we feel that Australia is moving in that direction. Let's capture that. Okay, that will work. That will get you 20%. The problem you've got there is you're competing with the Labor Party. And the Labor Party are moving into that territory as well because they're being pushed that way by the Greens. There's no market share there to pick up.
Yeah.
So you're fighting with an organization that is incredibly well resourced and frankly is far better at this stuff, far better at messaging, far better at marketing, far better organizationally, far better operationally, far better in so many ways at political gameplay because the
Yeah.
traditional liberal person is better at business.
I
The Labor
say to
people are
some
better at organizing.
I say to people that the mainstream political parties will, at their best, uh, uh, are capacious. They do contain a whole lot of often, sometimes contradictory elements. Famously, like FDR during the New Deal, there were Kennedy style New England patrician types. There were Southern segregationists. There were Prairie populists. There were Jewish intellectuals, and but they were sort of somehow united in being notionally in favor of the little guy. That was what united them. And during the Reagan Revolution, you had flinty kind of New Englanders. You had uh, Florida mums in their tennis shoes walking around. You had sunny Californian media execs. You also had prairie kind of populist types and Jewish intellectuals as well, that all united in, broadly speaking, in something where they were going patriotic, renew America, let's get the Soviets type, and that united them. So it is possible to have big part. I mean, it will always be necessary for mainstream parties to be a big tent, right? But they have to be united on something,
Right.
and they have to diagnose what the cause of the true problems that exist in the society today, not the ones that existed 30 years ago, and they have to have sophisticated answers and thoughtful answers to those problems. If you do that, I think you can kind of unite it rather than trying to establish a micro brand for every kind of sector of the economy. But there are challenges. It is a different age to those times as well. So I do hear that kind of media branding critique on that point. But
Yeah, no,
what do you?
I get it. Well, I think I mean the goal is 50 plus 1, right? You've got to get to 50 plus 1. And I think what we've got right now is a wedge that's been firmly driven by the left-wing side of politics down the middle of the conservative side of politics between people who are perceived to buy into certain issues and those who aren't. And that wedge, and this is why the culture war, despite the fact that the Liberal Party doesn't want to play the culture war and continually says it doesn't want to play it, why it doesn't have that choice.
Mm.
It's a false mistake of a it's part of this crisis denial thing actually that we think we can determine.
Yeah, what do you mean by that, Damian? Because you mentioned it.
Well, it's a phenomenon that's recognized that companies go through often when they come into crisis, and that can cause crises. It can be a long-running issue that leads to a crisis, and that it could be a festering cultural thing that's been there for a long time that can bring you to an existential crisis that erupts at one point. Or it can be a spontaneous crisis, an event-related crisis that's caused, okay? So you can have two types of crises, but when these crises occur, when you get to that point where, okay, something's happened, we've reached a tipping point, or this event's occurred, there's been this attack on us or something, and the share price is plummeting, and if you're a company that's been around for a long time, And the people within that company have spent their whole lives, working their way up the company, and the company's always been there, and it's always stood for this, and it's always been there, it's been reliable, and that I'm part of this, and my whole life's built around it. And suddenly you wake up one day and the world's going, we don't like that company anymore. Um, it's very hard for the people inside the organization to understand that they are becoming irrelevant very quickly, and that there is an existential crisis going on. And there's an incredible psychological resistance among the leadership to accepting crises. So we call this the crisis denial phase. And you'll see it when you walk into a boardroom of a company that's after crisis, or not boardroom, but an executive suite, and you're talking to the senior executives. You'll often get this idea. They still behave as if they are going to be there tomorrow, as if nothing's really changed, as if there isn't really a threat. So it's this they can't grasp that this thing that they've been a part of for so long and that they built their careers around could actually fold tomorrow, that Lehman Brothers might not be there tomorrow, that, or that Enron might not be here tomorrow. So it's a very difficult thing for executives, and you see it in crises a lot. And that's where the Liberal Party's right at now. I mean, they've got somebody in one, doing one of the reviews of the election, they've appointed somebody that is probably the problem, okay, to run the thing. So it's like you've got these people, it's like, let's do an internal analysis using the people who were the problem. We'll work it out ourselves. Thanks very much. No, you need to bring in outsiders to say, this is what happened, and to be objective and to give you a clear perspective on what went wrong. And I think because of that perspective and the idea that we don't feel that we could possibly, that this could disappear tomorrow, there isn't the sense of urgency there to do what needs to be done. This is an existential point of crisis for the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party could easily disappear. The Conservative Party in the UK is going through it. We could very much see the emergence of a new, sensible centre-right party. And just going back to that poll, I mean, One Nation have gone from 6.4 to 8%. And they're not the most attractive alternative for a lot of centre-right Australians. They don't find One Nation to be a good alternative. I don't have a view on it one way or the other. I think Pauline's done an amazing job with what she's matured over the years as well. I think that party's maturing slowly, but it needs to have more depth and breadth in its organisational structure, perhaps. But, that's a big jump, to go from 6.4 to 8 after an election. That's a 25% increase in their support across the country. Plus, you've got another, I think, is it 11% on the right side, where there's just waiting for someone to pick it up. So the market share is over there. It's not where Susan Ley and the progressive left of the Liberal Party are taking the party. It's over here on the other side. Now, that's fine. You might feel you need to do that for that segment of the market. We're not going to win back the inner city blue ribbon Liberal seats of, what are they? You know them better than I do, Dan. But
well, Ryan,
Kooyong and Ryan,
all these ones you say,
We're not going to win those inner city seats if we don't lean left, if we don't listen to the Champagne Liberals. But you are ignoring this market over here, and they're not probably going to vote for you if a viable alternative emerges. And we know that they're trying to do everything they can to prevent a viable alternative emerging. In unison with the major parties are introducing laws and regulations to try and keep out, minor parties from growing. But at the end of the day, a Nigel Farage will probably emerge. There'll be some charismatic leader. There'll be some better quality organisation behind it. Maybe One Nation will evolve into that sort of a thing. Who knows? But we will eventually see that market share taken up, because it has to be. It's a vacuum.
Well, it is quite amazing, actually, how immune Australia has been to the political change which is sweeping Western Europe and has swept the United States. I don't know why we haven't seen the emergences of a credible new party in Australia, like we have seen in Europe, and the way we've seen with Trump basically remake the Republican Party as well. I just, like you, I think those structural forces are coming here one way or another, and it's how you actually kind of deal with them. It can be done. It could be done where the existing party does actually see the train coming down the road and adjusts accordingly. I mean, there are advantages to having an existing political party. There's a certain DNA in it, governing DNA and its sort of structure, experience, and the rest of it. But like you said, existing executives don't aren't always aware about the true scale of the change required. So it's a problem. Hard to set up a new party, hard to reform an existing party too. Just turning to the sort of like more media side of things again. Obviously, the online world has exploded. How should centre right politicians in Australia engage with social media?
Well, I think first of all, just a basic media strategy would be good. We haven't seen that yet at all. I've been running the other side for 5 years, and I don't think I've received a single press release from the Liberal Party. So that's
Yeah.
disturbing, right? Um, it's not that the other side itself is a big show, but it would outrate a medium-sized markets talk radio, for example. So I would dare
And
to
the Prime
say that.
Minister Prime Minister goes on Abby Chatfield, and it's not the who has
Oh,
very
no, the Labor Party do it well. They're
yeah.
doing it okay. Not well, but they're doing it at least, and
Mm,
they're trying. They also support specific commentators. You haven't got to dig too deep to see that some of the biggest left-wing podcasters, video podcasters who are enormously influential,
mm,
um, pretty clearly stick to a party line of one or other organisations.
mm,
There's one that's very aligned with the Labor Party. I won't name that. I don't want to get sued, but you can see that everything that they say in their vodcasts is very much Labor Party policy, to the extent that they will criticize the Greens policy. They will criticize other left-wing institutions. We've
mm,
also seen another one emerge recently that I won't name because I don't want to get sued, that is very aligned with a think tank, a left-wing think tank in Sydney. Um, and and you don't have to really concentrate too much. Now, on the other side, we don't hide the fact that we're centre right. We are not funded directly by any think tank or political party. In fact, we're very independent. Not because I don't want to necessarily have some connection with centre right movement, or we couldn't do with a little funding. But but I like the fact that we're very independent. But also, and we would declare it if we had that funding. By the way, um,
mm,
but we have an individual funder who is a business person who is obviously on the right side of politics and funds us a little bit to cover our production costs. And then we have other sources of income from YouTube and things like that that help a little bit with some of the. Basically, I'm donating most of my time to that show
yeah, no,
still after 5 years, which I have no problem with. But it's just, I just want to be transparent about it, that we're not sort of taking any money from anyone that we're
yeah,
not declaring. But they are doing that on the left side of politics. They're definitely
mm,
doing that. Um, Now, with the other side, without, what I'm not seeing is just standard PR, good quality public relations. I mean, you don't send a press release with a check attached. That's not good journalism or public relations. It's highly unethical, and it's cash for comment, which shouldn't be
mm,
allowed. But we
mm.
are seeing that on that's the other side. I'm pretty sure indirectly.
I guess
Not our other side. I mean, the other side of
without
politics. Sorry.
without naming names because of the potential legal jeopardy. Um, okay, there have been some very media savvy online left wing influences to have emerged in the last couple of years. I'm thinking of Punters Politics, Friendly Geordies, and how should that are targeted at a youth audience too? How should the centre right counter this?
Well, the point I want to make was you could just start by doing basic PR, right? You don't have to get into the murky world of, oh, we're going to indirectly fund this
Mm,
podcast, like we are seeing with some. I'm not saying those, but some of the ones on the left.
mm,
Um, all you've got to do is do basic public relations, reach out and provide some people to come on the show and talk.
mm,
But we have this, and send a press release to the other side, right? And to Rebel News, and to Topher Field, and to NatCon
crack on.
Australia and Dan Ryan's podcast. Do something. Do some basic
Yeah.
public relations and media outreach to the online new media, and stop treating the old media as if it's the only media in town. Because a lot of people are arguing now that it's may not even be the main media anymore. Um,
I in different demographic segments, no, I'm not an expert. I can guarantee no one's reading the Australian, not even watching Sky News much, and certainly aren't focusing on the ABC. Even
No,
amongst the young, I don't think they're like
no.
like you said, the talkback radio. It's not really anywhere
Under
near as
55, talkback radio, AM talkback radio is pretty much finished if you're
yeah.
under 55. So that'll be finished in 20 years,
Mm,
30 years, uh, completely.
mm,
But if you want to reach young Australians, there's only one place to do it. And this is where they get their news. Now, one of the problems we've got in Australia is that it isn't really economically viable to do a show like The Other Side. It isn't going to make you any money or give you a wage, or
mm,
it's going to take a long time to get that going if you want to run
mm,
it and do it like we're doing with professional production, et cetera, et cetera.
mm,
So you need somebody like me who's semi-retired and needs a hobby or wants a hobby, or wants to participate in the market a little bit, which is not the greatest state of affairs. So I think the first thing we've got to do, if we are going to be regulating Google or regulating YouTube, rather than worrying about under 16 access, it might be best if we start saying to Google and YouTube, look, we're going to need you to weight Australian content a little bit in your algorithms for funding and your algorithms for presenting content to your audiences.
mm,
That we expect a certain. Now there's a precedent for that, in that television and radio licenses in Australia used to be given out on the condition that you had a certain amount of Australian content. You had to have drama made in Australia, you had to have comedy made in Australia to get a TV license and keep it. You had to have play Australian music. If you want to have a music radio station, there had to be a certain percentage of Australian music played.
mm.
Because if we don't, because we're an Anglosphere small country, we're going to get swamped with the large Anglosphere content. And that's
Yeah.
what's happening with Australia right now. Kids aren't reading the Australian, they're not watching a current affair, they're not watching the news on a TV, they're not consuming the Australian, they're not reading newspapers, but they are consuming American and British online digital content.
Mm,
And so local issues, not only aren't state issues getting, but national issues are not getting the coverage, the attention that they
mm,
used to be, which leaves us in a really dangerous position. So
mm.
I think there needs to be some economic, if there is going to be intervention in the market by government, it should be around how we weight the both the attention algorithm flagging and recommendations on YouTube, because there is no alternative to YouTube in Australia. Rumble is not big enough here to be an alternative to YouTube. YouTube is television. YouTube is TV of Australia of the future. One channel run by one company. So there has to be regulation in that case, because you've got a monopoly and you can't have that. So we have to say, look, guys, you need to be giving a little more money to Australian content in terms of the advertising algorithms, and you need to be flagging Australian content over non-Australian content in the Australian market a lot more. And we need metrics to measure that, and you need to present that to a Senate committee, and it needs to be those benchmarks need to be met.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I can
It's
see
never
the
going to happen,
problem.
of course.
How the
In
I
my
can see the
opinion,
problem.
but
How the solution is implemented or proposed is a different question. The most successful media proprietor in the world is Australian, but most of our mainstream opinion columnists and media personalities simply do not have the same type of global influence as their counterparts in the UK or the US, as you sort of alluded to. How can Australia be more influential globally in thought leadership? Because just to clarify that, I mean, it's like the opinion columnists of the Telegraph in the UK and the Guardian, they they have Twitter accounts, which they're sort of much more part of the global debate than any of the columnists I can think of in Australia in the mainstream press. So how can we counter that?
Well, I think the reality is we've got to accept that we're 1/3 the size of the UK and we're 1/13 the size of the United States. So we're never going to have the clout because we don't have the range of
Mm,
pool of talent to draw from. So you're always going to get this sort of. But that said, you've got people like Miranda Devine who are
mm,
dominant in New York media,
mm.
Australian who's powering along there, and there's plenty of others in the media behind the scenes as well in the UK and Australia. Sorry, in the US.
Well,
So Australia does.
Australians know how to
I
run
mean,
media organizations. Like, it's
yeah,
fine.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
They
yeah.
do,
But
right?
do we have the editorial people?
Mm,
Yeah, I don't know. what or why that is. I mean, it may be just that. I mean, one of the things that I wrestle with the other side is how much do I cover international versus
Mm,
national? And I've decided to go very national because we tend to do better when we run national pieces because we're not competing with a lot of other American and UK content on the
mm,
international stuff. And plus, I want to fill that gap. So I have a personal reason for wanting to
mm,
focus on the national stuff. So I think just by its very nature, then I'm not going to. My audience is 90% Australian,
mm,
and 2% New Zealand, and 2% UK, and
mm,
a few other places. So uh, that's very, very, very obvious that
mm,
Australians want Australian content, and that it's of not much interest to the rest of the world.
mm,
Um, but even when we do international content, we're not necessarily picking up international. I've had some big name American guests on the show, like Alan Dershowitz and Candace Owens, and different people are quite big names. You would think, oh, these are going to be big shows. They rate very average, and they don't draw the crowd you think they're going to draw because there's plenty of platforms in the US and the UK for people to catch those interviews.
mm. Interesting. What do you think the media landscape looks like in Australia in 10 years' time?
I think that linear broadcast will be pretty much done, except for breaking news, and maybe uh, so there's always going to be room for a 24/7 live news channel. Um, there's always going to be room for some personality chat talk that's live,
Mm,
like a breakfast radio show, to listen to when you're getting up in the morning, get you across the day. But I think increasingly we're going to just see more and more content. Content will be on demand. It won't be something that's pumped out by Channel 9 and Channel 10 off a broadcast stick that's going out in linear form that you've got to be there at a certain time to watch. We're already seeing that shift occurring massively.
mm,
So that's the dominant thing. We'll also continue to see the convergence of print and broadcast media, video and audio media
mm.
channels. So there won't be that much of a distinction anymore
Will
between.
that new landscape in 10 years' time, will that be more beneficial to the center right? Because I think in the US, at least, the traditional networks have been sort of, delegitimized, and
Oh yeah.
they have
Mm,
they're
mm.
they're on the way out in many cases, apart from ones that are tailoring to their particular audience, like the New York Times. Um, but in Australia, perhaps it's because of the dominance of the ABC. I don't think we are in the same space as the US is. Do you think that's right?
Yeah, as I said, the ABC acts as a massive commercial barrier to entry to anybody. I mean, imagine if we had a government law firm, acting in the corporate space.
Mm. We
You
do
know,
actually.
with
We do
with
actually have the AG, Australian government solicitors corporate sacrifice, but
yeah,
they do
but do they operate in the corporate space?
they have their particular niche. They don't do the same thing as the ABC does in terms of its reach.
Yeah, yeah, competing directly with corporates. I mean, yeah, I mean it, or yeah, I mean it's really uh, problematic to the industry in a very
Mm,
serious way, and I
mm,
don't think people really understand that the implications of that, of just what the ABC does to prevent a healthy diversity and evolution and diverse evolution of um, media,
mm,
journalism, narratives, conversations, debate, but also the arts. Let's
mm,
remember the arts. People look at the ABC and say, "Oh, it's so wonderful what the ABC does for the arts." Is it really? They've set
mm,
themselves up as a curator of the arts in a lot of cases,
mm,
and again, a commercial barrier to entry to alternative artists who don't want to toe the ABC line, who don't want to agree with the ABC politics, that want to do different kinds of shows and different kinds of
mm,
of uh, art and music and whatever. And yet, there's this little club of elites who set up as gatekeepers, effectively, of what is and isn't approved of as acceptable art to be supported by the media.
mm,
In that sense. So, yeah, I mean, I think we've got to relook at the whole purpose of the ABC. But any idea of reforming the ABC incrementally, In change management, there's two ways of doing change management. It's incremental or breakthrough change. Incremental isn't going to work with an organization like the ABC because the culture is so heavily strong. It will just eat anything that tries to change it from within. It needs to be blown up, and we need to go back to the drawing board and start again with what we need to do, what we need a national broadcaster for, and we need to get back on charter. We had to revise the charter heavily, and then we need to get them back on charter, and there have to be penalties for them moving away from charter or not abiding by charter. And there needs to be much more accountability. And that's got to be, the spotlight's got to be on them much more. And they can't hide behind we don't want government interference. No. You're a government taxpayer-funded organization. You're accountable to the Senate, to the Parliament, and we need to drag them before Parliament, every quarter with heavy estimates committee hearings.
I think that there should be a sort of from first principles reassessment about how taxpayer funds should be used to improve and promote the media in Australia.
I'm a classical liberal, Dan, so I only believe in government intervention where the market fails, and the market fails in those areas I talked about. Foreign correspondence, maybe in-depth news, and some country coverage of country and rural issues.
No, for sure.
I'd like to see Landline back and doing the right sort of coverage. That would be good.
Just to sort of wrap up, we've seen this fragmentation in the media market, and sometimes that's cited as a cause of polarization. But oftentimes I think it's just people getting their news from different places in their own little silo. So there's no longer this communal campfire that people tune into at 6:00 and know what everyone else is talking about. And there are positives to this. You get a lot more wider range of views, but there are downsides, right? It's almost as though we no longer share the same type of stories in common or news in common anymore. So you can't go and talk to your colleague at work at the water cooler and discuss last night's show. So is that something we should just not lament too much, or is there a way of
no, on the contrary, look, I'm with you on this. I think this is massive because we don't get too deep into it, but what is culture, right? And I know for NatCon, this is a really important point. What are we? Who are we as a people? We're united by what are our core values as a nation, right? So it speaks to our very nationhood. If you like, in a sense, we're seeing a globalization fragmentation. So it's like I feel closer to a Republican who watches Daily Wire coverage than I do to an Australian who watches, something online like Mamma Mia or stuff that I would never watch. So that's problematic because it's fragmenting our society as a nation. So what culturally is the glue? And you say, it's just the stories. It's the story. It's not just stories. Stories and narratives are how people make sense of the world. So the narratives we tell ourselves are fundamental to our cultural nationhood. And if you've got half the country saying, welcome to country is a great thing, and the other half going, welcome to country is an insult.
Well, it's even, there were controversies political controversies in the past. But I worry it's now a situation where you're not even sharing the same information or even the focus. So it's not even as though you disagree on different things. There's always been political disputes amongst people of a common culture. There were civil wars in the United States, right? But they still on a day-to-day basis were discussing the same things. Whereas now it's just, you talk to people, even those who I disagree with, and if they're not on X, they're simply unaware of what the kind of controversy of the day is, or the things that people are talking about online are, and it's hard to I find sometimes a struggle to sort of get them to appreciate that there's a lot of people talking about something else that appears on the op-ed page of the Australian, if you know what I mean.
Well, what are we missing too? What are we all missing in every echo chamber that we're in? What are people really? It's so hard now for people to step outside their own echo chamber, and so we're kind of all living in these little bubbles, occasionally bumping into each other, but having no perspective on each other's worldview.
And there has to
There
be
is.
something in common, like on the NatCom theme that binds the nation together, holds the nation together culturally, ethnically or ideologically, a combination of those. Because otherwise, you're just sitting in this zone, Australia, and you might as well be in Dubai or New York or wherever. What actually is it that tethers you to this nation? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a challenging thing because, um, as you say, it does have its upsides in
Mm,
that, you know, we're probably not gonna rush into wars we shouldn't be rushing into quite like we used to perhaps, or we might not make bad decisions because we're exposed to more just by the way of the fact that it's out there, and we might only notice that, a relative or a friend has gone down a different direction or a rabbit hole or something, and
mm,
we start to think, "Oh, there could be." So, I do think that to a large extent, the fragmentation and diversity of opinion of views is helpful, right?
agree.
In getting the truth out. So you shine enough sunlight on things, and eventually the truth will emerge. If you believe in an ultimate truth, as I do, I'm not a relativist, and I don't think
Mm,
that. So I do think that it's dangerous, more dangerous for the left, because the light's being shone on the idiocy and the non-universality, the non-acceptance by everybody of their
mm,
assumptions, as
mm.
it once would have been. Once 10 years ago, the ABC could probably get away with being all about identity politics. But 10 years on, and it's like, well, hang on a minute. A lot of people are waking up to the fact that this identity politics stuff has an agenda. It comes from a particular political paradigm, which is left wing. It is a manufactured and constructed thing to a large extent. It's not just people being nice to one another. Identity politics is not about friendly, warm, fuzzy equality and egalitarianism. It's
I
actually
hear
about
you.
control.
Mm,
So the story's getting out there, right? The very fact that we have the term woke, that we identify what that phrase actually means. 5 years ago, people were like, "What is woke? What does woke mean?"
yeah,
Okay,
it's
woke
just
is
on,
it's a
on,
slang term for
online.
identity politics.
Yeah, online has definitely allowed us to see the political views of ABC news presenters. So the whole um, pretext that they're impartial or politically neutral is just, I mean, it's completely been exposed.
We used to measure it. They'd say, "What measure the bias of the ABC?" Oh, well, we'll measure all the minutes that we're talking about the Liberal Party and all the minutes that we're talking about the Labor Party. And people would say, "Well, that's not good enough. You got to look at the tone, and you got to look at is it negative? Okay, we'll measure whether it's negative or positive. And here's some numbers." But that's pointless because it's not the coverage and the amount of time and whether it's a negative story or a positive story. It's the whole cultural undercurrent. It's what's
Yep.
not said. It's the assumptions. It's the premises, the unspoken premises.
And the issues that
Of
they
who you're
focus
putting on to
on.
talk and who
I
you're
mean,
not
that
putting on to talk.
they're not running a current affairs show on the ABC talking about how terrible, quote unquote, even though I don't use the word much, woke or DEI is, right? They don't,
Right.
it's simply not
No.
the focus of their agenda. They're focusing on other things. I mean, I try to keep these things to an hour, but to wrap it up, what next for you? Where will we see
Retirement.
you?
I'm old, Dan. The big 6 O's around the corner. Um, yeah, look, I have no idea. I mean, I will just move one foot in front of the other as I do, and just keep going with this. I don't know how long the other side will continue. That will depend on sort of the momentum, I guess, that it gets, and whether people
Mm,
still want us to do it, and whether I can still do it. Um, and um, yeah, I mean, I try not to predict the future. They say, man makes plans and God laughs.
yes. Yeah.
You've still got to make plans, of course. You still got to have some direction and guide your life a little bit. But I'm finding as I get older, I'm letting go a little bit more. I don't have the financial pressures that I once used to, but I also can't. You can't create a business out of thin air. It does need the support. So, I mean, if someone came along to really support the thing, we've got a proven
Mm.
test case now. What do
And
they say? It's proof of
you're a
concept.
media professional. Um, I really appreciate all you do. I mean, it's a public service in the true sense. The other side, and you don't need to do all this stuff. It's not overly commercially driven, right? It's because you think it's important that alternative views, or not alternative, like, you know views get out there that should be much more well known on the ABC and publicized amongst other organizations. And I appreciate all you do, Damien. So thanks for coming on.
Well, likewise, man. I mean, I think this is great too, and what you're doing with NatCon. It's like a mutual pat on the back society, but no, I really do. I mean, we need it's nice and professional, and
there's a lot of
NatCon. What is next for NatCon? I mean, are you going to start a political party? Or?
Well, I'm going to DC in September for the NatCon conference. So there will be
the global one, right?
Yeah, so that'll be interesting, and there'll be more that comes on after that. But watch this space, and no more mutual backpacking. There's too much of that in the media already. I'll leave you to it, Damien. Take it easy, mate.
Right, mate.
Appreciate it.
Take care. Thanks a lot, Dan. See you soon.